First off, thank you for coming to Conquer Mobile App CI/CD Challenges. I know you have a lot of choices, but thank you for choosing this session. I appreciate that. My name is Jamie Moore. I'm with Mobile Labs. I'm a Senior Director of Solution Architecture. I've been in, as you can kind of see by looking at me, I've been in the software industry for a long time, primarily from the software testing side and the challenges that we have there, but also from a DevOps perspective. I was with IBM for a long time with the Rational, Tivoli, WebSphere. We were trying to figure out how to get all that to work, and we don't have to go there. As Tara said the other day, there was a lot of drinking and involved in that. But you know, it's not so much what I bring to the table, other than the fact that I've been around. It's interesting to me that, you know, with all the technology changes that we've had, things that are different now than they were then, the problems that we face are still very similar. So anyway, let's get on and started. Our agenda is some, you know, here's the agenda slide, blah, 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 blah. So basically, quick question for you guys. Who here is a QA person? Excellent. And then I guess the rest of you are more like DevOps people. So what I thought we'd do is, in this session, as you can kind of see this standard stuff, is really talk about the similarities and the differences between your standard kind of web application DevOps stuff and what similarities and differences that the mobile brings. So this is kind of the standard stuff, right? And I guess nowadays that VM stuff over there needs to change to all the new stuff, Kubernetes, the Tecton, the Spinnakers, the Jenkins X, all that stuff. But basically you can spin up stuff, right? Which we used not to be able to do a long time ago. So executives love this kind of stuff, right? Because it's on a PowerPoint slide. Hey, I can grab the source code, I can build it, you know, I can deploy it on these things, I run my tests, and then I can run it out into production. Look how nice and easy and simple that is. When you guys know reality is more like this, right? Who played Mousetrap when they were younger? All right, so for those who didn't play, not that we're going to go into a whole big Mousetrap kind of thing, but basically the board starts empty, and up at the top, see if I can get this thing to point. Whoop, sorry. Anyway, you got to build piece by piece this whole contraption so that eventually you can capture that mouse at the end. And the reason why I liken it to the whole DevOps world is you got to depend on everybody to build their piece, and they got to build it correctly. All right, so if you don't have like the ball on top of the platform sitting there just right, it's not going to work. And then the way this whole thing works is somebody turns that crank, it kicks the boot, it kicks the ball off. So every step along the way depends on the successful execution of the step before it. Right? So it's more like mass chaos, kind of like we've been talking about. But anyway, that's kind of my view of the world, that it's not just a simple PowerPoint kind of thing. All right, so that's kind of setting the stage. So basically, right, the process is the very first thing. You check in code, right? We got to gather the source code, right? I mean, that's pretty straightforward. So from a mobile perspective, that's not going to be a whole lot different than what you do for your web stuff or your other apps. Your code is going to be in some sort of source code management or wherever you stick it. So from that perspective, you're not going to run into a whole lot of issues. So check off the first step. Yeah, that's not too bad. It's the next step that things start to get a little fun when you start building the application. And to kind of set the stage for that, let's talk about the difference in the architecture between a web and a mobile environment. So with the web stuff, I mean, this is obviously simplified because now with all the cloud stuff, I mean, the web server, app server, database server, I mean, they can be anywhere, right? So it's just on a PowerPoint thing, it's just there, right? But the nice thing is you control all that. It's all within your stuff. Obviously, you can spin all these things up from a test perspective to throw things out there as you go through the process. But all that's there, even on the end, you want to test it on some PCs, get some browsers up, all that sort of stuff. I mean, you guys are spinning that stuff up. That's where we're talking about all these gains and whatnot that we have, the speed of software delivery that we've been talking about, all kind of based on all that sort of. But from a web standpoint, mobile standpoint, all right, we add in, obviously, some components, mainly a phone. So basically, depending on how you have your architecture, right? I mean, everybody's heard of the mobile web, so I can talk to the web server, but then you have a mobile server, you got some things. So what really makes this different is obviously the phone And the reason why it's different is now we're talking a client-server architecture, right? So in the mobile world, I mean, in the web world, right, you control everything. You're just serving pages to people that request it, right? But you control all that. You're just sending it out. But now, from a mobile side, you've actually got to create something that gets put onto a device, like an exe, if you're familiar with the Windows stuff. So it's an executable file that's got to get out there. So it makes it different in how you get to that. And there's some, and we'll go through the different challenges that go along with that. So first off, you build a web app, right? It's a web app. It might be a different format, structure, or whatever. There are different ways to build a web app, but it's a web app. All right, well, with mobile, there's 3 kinds of apps that you need to take into consideration. One is, obviously, it's the simple one. It's the mobile web, right? So this is just, I get on here, I pull up Chrome, pull up Safari, whatever. I'm still hitting the same, website that you got set up. That's pretty straightforward. The other one is it's what they call native. Who here, let me back up. Who here has built like apps before for mobile? All right, a few of you. So those of you who haven't, all right, so what do I mean by native, all right? So this is where I write the source code that's specific to the device itself, right? So we're using all the capabilities that a device might have, like a Waze, right? It needs to know where you are, it accesses the GPS of the device. Other apps might use the camera. So these things are different than a mobile web app, right? The web page, this is a web page, it's just a web page. It really doesn't know where it is, other than the fact it's on a mobile device. So that's a challenge. And then the third type is you can kind of combine those 2 kind of platforms. So the hybrid takes some native capabilities, but also has some web elements on top of it. And this presents some really nice challenges when you go into, again, we're still talking about building the app. So these are the types of apps you can build. And then the way you build it is, this is where we get into some fun. Because there's 2 platforms, right? This is kind of straightforward. Everybody knows this. You either have an Android or an iOS, or an Apple. Used to be Windows. Windows just kind of went away because of these 2 guys. So the nice thing about Android is it's wide open, right? So when you're talking about building it, right, what am I going to build it on? All right, so I can build an Android app on basically anything. It plays with everybody. It's the most friendly thing out there. It doesn't care. It's a nice extrovert kind of platform. Hey, come on, I can play with you, and you. It doesn't matter. It's pretty straightforward. The problem child is who here has an iPhone or Apple device? All right, these are the problem children. Has to be built on a Mac, all right? So Apple, put their little fence around their little thing and said, hey, no. If you want to build an app for me, you're going to do it the way I say, how I say, when I say, and all that sort of stuff. So they really control that, which it makes it a challenge. Who here has built an iOS app before? All right, well then you guys know all of this kind of stuff, because then the next step is when you build this stuff for an Apple device, you got to worry about what? The signing certificate, provisioning profile. Those of you who don't know anything about that, be thankful. We talked to Apple at one point, just a little sidebar here, and we were talking about their challenges doing their own testing. This was the biggest challenge that they had. Their own people were like, this whole signing certificate provisioning profile thing is just a bear. So for those of you who aren't aware, just to kind of give you an idea, when you build this app, for security reasons, the way Apple has determined to make this run is you have to have a signing certificate. So it determines, we don't have to get into all that. But then you take that signing certificate and then you combine it into what they call a provisioning profile. So the provisioning profile says, okay, this is a signing certificate that belongs in here. This is the app identification, and then these are the devices that it can actually run on. So there's 3 types of provisioning profiles too. I mean, if that wasn't bad enough, you got your enterprise, and that's the one you get off the Apple store, the App Store, right? So it's an enterprise thing. It'll run on everybody, right? It doesn't care. But then you have an ad hoc, you have a development, and they have their own different capabilities, and so you need to take that into consideration as you go through, again, in a DevOps world, as far as building an app and getting it deployed onto things. So The nice thing is you don't have to really know all of that because from a Jenkins perspective, if you haven't got into here, we'll go back to this kind of process. All right, so we got the source code, we talked about that, that's pretty straightforward. The building it, there are actually a couple of, you can do it by hand, you can do it in steps. Both Android and iOS support command line commands on how you build it, and you can specify from an iOS perspective particularly, you can specify the cert, the provisioning profile, you can let it kind of build stuff. But there are some plugins you can use with Jenkins that will help you along that path, like that Xcode one. It has fields for everything you need to fill out, so in case you forget, you can fill that in and you can be good to go. All right, so we go through that and we actually build it. All right, now I have my, and again, it's like an exe, so like for Android, it's a .apk file, for iOS, it's a .ipa file. What do I do with that? Again, I got to get it onto something to run. So here's your next choice, all right? And that is, what are you going to put it on? You have some choices here to run this on. So you can do it on a real device or you can do it on a simulator or emulator. I'm sure most of all of you have heard of these. And we'll talk about why one versus the other. Obviously, the simulator comes on a computer. You can spin it up, kind of like spinning up a VM of a Windows box or something, right? So it kind of acts like the device. Or you can do a real device. So we recommend use a real device. We're not the only ones. Apple and Google both will tell you that you need to run stuff on a real device because it's a device, right? Simulators and emulators are running on the system. They do stuff. But they're running on a computer, so they're not the real thing. Oh, here's the other reason why I recommend you do test on a real device. Everybody has one of these, right? One of these handy, right? This is a real device, right? So your end users, how many of your end users are using a simulator or emulator? Right? Now, our job as DevOps people, whatever, is to deploy to a production-like environment. Right? So a simulator emulator is not a production environment. This is a production environment. Right? So you got to deploy to a real device. So if you accept that premise that, okay, I've got to go to a real device, then, how do I get that on here? Right? It's not like a Windows box or any kind of desktop, laptop that's plugged in my network. When I build it, I can just throw it out there because it's already on the network. You all have these in your purse or in your pocket or wherever, right? They're really not connected into the network. So there's a couple ways you can do that. The old-fashioned way is, you could set up a Jenkins master, Jenkins slave, and then have this guy directly plugged into the box, right? All right, that's kind of the old-fashioned way. So in this regard, you can do that. You can use command line things. Once it's built, you can deploy it onto the app. But this is rather limited in that that you have to know that that device is connected to that box. You have to have it there. And then, that's one. What if you want to do, like, more than one? All right, so now you do it like this. Well, these boxes have limited number of USB ports, right? So you can run into constraints there. So what are you going to do? Set up a farm of boxes and deploy. So there is a better way, but kind of broaden this out a little bit. We're talking in the DevOps world, but from a organization perspective, right? Doing mobile app development and testing and all that sort of stuff is broader than just this. Lots of people need access to lots of devices, right? So your dev teams need access to real devices. Obviously, the DevOps people, the release engineers, whatever you call yourselves, that group, they need the devices. And then obviously the testers need some real devices. All right, you see here, this can get kind of unwieldy, unmanageable. It just kind of get crazy. So how do you solve this? Well, there's probably a couple ways, but the one best way is with a device cloud. All right, so this is where you can take all these devices and put them into a situation where now you can have access to it. So, all right, device cloud, what is it? It's basically, think of, all right, so everybody knows about the cloud stuff, right? You can stuff in the cloud, but this is like the server. You would just connect a bunch of devices to the server. Now you could talk to those devices through the server, right? Through the device cloud server. So that's how that works. So that's how you would set all that up. Now, next question is, okay, a device cloud. I'll tell you there's two types of device clouds, right? Who here has heard of like Amazon Device Farm, Perfecto? So there are a number of types of clouds out there, but there's really two types. There's a public, and then there's a private on-premise, right? So one of the two. And then on the public side, hosted, if you will, they actually kind of put those into two, so public and private. So what do I mean by that? So you could go to like the Amazon Device Farm, and this, I'm talking about the public hosted here. So I could rent a device, I could run my tests on it, I could deploy, I could do all sorts of stuff. When I'm done with that device, I take my stuff off, but then that device, same device could be used by you, right? So it gets shared among different people. So you could use it, once I'm done, everybody could use it. So it's just out there, anybody and everybody can use it. All right, so that's a public one. The private one is not as dedicated. So even though Amazon is hosting it, that device is dedicated to me, so only people in my organization can have access to it. None of you would be able to do that. So that's a private hosted one. Now, the on-premise one, you see the box over there. So this is, not to turn this into commercial right now, but this is what we provide. So an on-premise solution, why would people want to use an on-premise solution? Well, a lot of security issues, particularly like for financial people, healthcare. Folks that can't take their pre-production stuff and have it go outside their premises. These are the people that care about on-premise. So if you're in a hosted one and you're a financial or even healthcare provider and you send stuff up there, that can break some security rules. So an on-prem allows you to take it, put it within your network, within your four walls, onto your thing, so it's all contained within your stuff. The devices that sit in the cart, they connect within your Wi-Fi, so it's all within your stuff. So it's very secure. So people like government kind of care about that, finance likes that. So anyway, those are the two types of clouds that you can get out there, but pick one, choose one. You can do a mix, right? So if you're doing like mobile web, probably the public hosted is fine, right? Because there's really nothing about web that really is all that important. So that would be fine. So you got to get a device cloud. So once you've kind of decided on a device cloud, then now everybody can have access to those devices. So what happens here is you get device utilization. We talked about earlier when they were just kind of plugged in. Well, normally those are dedicated, right? So people can't really use them for other purposes, right? So because if I'm a DevOps guy and I need to deploy onto this device, I need to make sure it's there. Well, if I'm in a cloud, then if I'm not using it, somebody else can use it. So different teams can use it and go through it and do their different types of tasks. So that's what we need to do there. So now, go back to our kind of picture. Just kind of, again, come back to the similarities and differences. So we talked about use the cloud, so now I can push it out to, once I build it, right, and go through all the hoo-ha to build it. And I can use, for example, just again, when you're talking to a cloud, this is where Jenkins comes in too, so you can now, clouds have their different syntax on how you talk to them, right? But basically, they're going to allow you to, once you build that app, you can push it up there, and then you can install it onto a device, right? And that's just a part of your process, right? You build it. Same kind of thing you do now, right, with web, right? You build it and you deploy that, and then you have your web. But here's a little different because you got to get it out onto the client-server device. So just stick it in as part of your process flow. Stick it out there and do it on a test. And then once it's deployed onto a device, now what? Now this is where we have to tip our hat to our QA people. Testing in mobile environment is well, it's a challenge. We thought web was bad. Mobile is tough. And there's some challenges there. One is you got to get the right tools. And we're going to talk a little bit about this. The other is you got to get the right skilled resources to work those tools. which is, that's a whole nother topic. And then we got to create all the different tests, right? So the whole thing about DevOps, and then coming from a testing perspective, I mean, this is true. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into the DevOps world, but if you don't run your tests, if the tests don't run, if the tests aren't the right tests to run, or anything like that, I mean, then what's the point, right? I mean, that's your gauntlet of going through the app to make sure that you're ready to go into production. Is it has to go through all your battery of tests. So you got to have your tests, and they got to be pertinent, and then they got to do their jobs correctly. So this is, again, I mean, both you guys are probably tied for the toughest jobs out there. So from a testing perspective, there are a lot of choices out there. In the web side, right, you got Selenium is probably, who here is organization is using Selenium? Yeah, all right. I mean, there's some other ones out there, commercial products. I mean, a long time ago, it used to be UFT, right? I mean, that was a thing. Selenium took care of that. There are a couple other commercial products out there that tackle the web, but primarily it's Selenium. For the mobile side, it's a lot different. Now, up here on the top left is Appium. Anybody hear of Appium before? All right, a few of you. So basically, Appium is the Selenium version for mobile. So works the same, acts the same. Architected a little differently, but the front end is the same type of architecture. So if you're a Selenium person, you could use Appium for your tests, all right? But you've got to be very technically oriented to use Appium. It doesn't really help you very much. You got to know what you're doing. Same thing with like Xcode and Android Studio. So they have testing tools specific for them for those platforms. Xcode is XUI test. Android Studio is Espresso. Again, you got to know what you're doing. Not everybody does. And this is where we're talking about the skilled resources challenges. I mean, you got to have somebody that can program. So it's not somebody, used to be where you take somebody that knew the app and then you move them into QA and say, hey, now you're a tester, right? Well, those types of people, the business analyst testers, can't use these to build a test case because it's just not their background. So that's where they would use something like maybe a Tricentis or some of the other commercial products out there that help bridge that gap, right? So that's, I mean, there's a lot of different choices. And not only that, the way these things are architected is different. Some require tethered devices. Most of them require tethered devices. Some of them, it's just provide reporting. Some of them don't. So it just depends on what you're looking for, what your team is capable of. There's a lot of choices out there that you can go after and pick and choose. So it's kind of, good luck. It's just a matter of what fits your team, right? Do you want open source? Do you want a product commercial product to pay for? So anyway, there's a lot of choices and you can go after it. All right, so brought up this to kind of talk about, this is what it would look like with when you're using a device cloud. So from a developer's perspective, they're building their app in either Xcode or Android Studio. They're used to using simulators, right? Because they just fire that up, it pops up in a little window, they can act with it, they can build it, they can deploy to it, all that sort of stuff. But when you have a device cloud, right now, you can pull up the actual real device in its own little viewer. It's just a web page on your device or on your computer, but you're actually talking to a real device, and now the workflow is the same. From a developer's perspective, if I'm building and I want to deploy and do my debugging and all the magic that goes on with the developer stuff, they can do that, but it's the same workflow, so it doesn't really, developers don't like to change things. So you're having to plug in a device in and out of their box, and that can be a little bit of pain, but this is a way they can just use the same workflow, but now they're doing it on a real device, so the testing that they do, the debugging that they do, the results that they get out of that based on a real device should help make the code higher quality when they push it up and actually check it in, to kick off that mousetrap to do the next thing. So that's what that kind of looks like. And then from this is like an Appium perspective. So again, not that you have to know the coding here, but again, it can run on a real device and you can watch it and all that sort of stuff. So that's what the advantage of having these devices in a device cloud will allow you to do. So you can And obviously, you don't have to watch it. If you're in a DevOps mode and depending on how you kick it off, right? Is it when I do a code commit or I just do it every night at midnight or whatever it is, right? These tests would run on these devices, whether you watch it or not, right? It's like, yeah, there you go. So it would work. So once you get that sort of stuff done, connect to it. You decide on your test framework. You build your test, and then. Here's the key thing, right? So, and again, this is where you got to have some empathy for your QA folks, because this topic we're getting ready to talk to is what keeps them up at night and makes their heads fly off, because there's a lot of things to consider when you talk about the suite of automated tests. And what do I mean by that? All right. Well, let's talk about iOS. All right. So, right now, you can see on the major versions there's a handful of iOS OS versions. Right? Most everybody's on 12, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And then there's a good handful of different devices out there. And these are what's in use across the world. So flip side from the other thing we're talking about with Android being such a nice thing to play with and iOS being so tight, this is where iOS being so tight is nice, because they kind of make you upgrade to the latest OS. Right? They don't let you languish out there. Android, on the other hand, doesn't really care. So you look at this spread and go, whoa, there's a lot of people still out there on 4X. I mean, holy crap. I mean, that was a long time ago. But again, they're still on it. And then you look at the devices, and this is a few years ago. There's just, it's the Wild Wild West out there. So this is where Android being so fun and friendly, is that's the backside of it, because there's everywhere. So what you don't know is how one manufacturer takes Android and puts it on their hardware. Does it run the same as like a Samsung, HTC, all those guys, right? The way they implement it could be different. Even on iOS, there's an instance where same OS version, the app ran different on an iPhone 5 versus an iPhone 6. So when you're dealing with OS versions and hardware, things can be different. So let's put this a little into perspective. So, lots of stuff, blah, blah, lots of permutations. Let's bring it down to, again, the QA folks. This is what happens to them. So from an iOS perspective, let's just say you just take 10, because we don't want to have the point versions up here either, right? I mean, so it's 12.1, 12.2, 12.3, 11, all the 11 dots, 10 dots. We'll just take 10, just take 15 devices. I want to run a test. I want to run login. Let me just see username, password, hit sign in. Does it work, right? Just to cover this, that's 150 test cases, right? Ooh, let's go to Android, right? So bajillion OS versions, you can't do all of them, right? Just take top 30. Narrow it down a little bit, right? Well, that's 480. So if I'm going to run login on iOS and Android, that's a bunch of tests. That's just for login. If I'm doing the Delta app, right, how about booking a flight, checking my status on a flight? I don't want to look at this. I want to look at that. I got a banking app, right? I want to create a new account. I want to check my balance. I want to do a transfer. How about what happens if I log in with the wrong stuff? I mean, so the amount of test cases you got to run is, from a QA perspective, this can get really wild and crazy. So this is why you need to have access to devices. This is why you want to have a device cloud with all the devices. And then I will say, at this point, we talked about running on real devices, and then there's also simulators and emulators. Obviously, you're not going to cover every last instance with this. Simulators and emulators can be a benefit when you're doing testing on kind of like the outside outliers, right? So do that 80-20 rule, right? So the 80% of your customers are probably using 20% of the devices and OSs. So cover that. Make sure you're doing that with the real devices. And then, for the other 20% of your customers that might be using some of the outliers, you can probably get away with doing simulators and emulators there. But basically, you got a lot of stuff here to worry about. So that's a key thing. So if we go back and put this into our Jenkins thing, again, kind of with our perfect PowerPoint here. Now, once I push it to the device, got it on there. Now I can kick off my test, right? So that's the part that's really different from your standard web stuff, right? When you run up your web test, you can kick off your Selenium test and all that sort of stuff. All you got to do there is you're testing for a few browser types, right? Chrome, blah blah blah. Maybe IE, Firefox, just the different versions. But it's not so much. Again, this is a challenge with mobile is hardware OS combinations, right? So there, and again, from a Jenkins perspective, and this is where it depends on your test framework, right? So now you got to make sure that it can be executed, right, from command line kind of thing, or somehow kick it off, depending on how that works. And this is where you can use the Jenkins magic with, obviously, again, depending on which test tool you run off with, how you want to thread that out, either parallel jobs in your pipelines, or this or that. So this is where you would use your creativity and your knowledge of Jenkins on how to set all that up to run the different tests across all the different devices within your process. Right, so that's how that works. So once you've got all your tests run and all that, what's the next thing? And that is, well, here's just an example, just kind of a bigger thing. So it's just the first two, right? Push it up there, install it onto a device, and then kick off your test. So there's a lot of variety in how you kick off your test. So just however that would fit for you. This is obviously just a jar file on fire now. That's an Appium thing. So anyway, it just depends on what you're doing and how that would fold into Jenkins and then go back. So then, obviously, once you do that, what's the next phase, right? And that's the feedback phase, right? So this is the important part as well. So again, depending on your framework that you're using, then that's where you examine all the results. So this is not going to be a whole lot different than what you're doing with the Selenium stuff, right? So you run your Selenium test, you look at those results, right? Same thing here. You run all your tests, depending on how you run it, when it's done, whether it comes up in the console in Jenkins, whether it comes out in some sort of HTML format, however you set that up, that's when you come back and you're going to look at all the different results and decide, okay, is this ready for the next step? Am I going to throw this out into production, or do I need to go back and do something else? Is something else an issue? So that's that one. And then the other challenge. So let's we're just kind of going through our process here. Let's say everything passed, and now we're ready to go. So here's another difference between web and mobile. So web, it's done, it's passed. I'm ready to put it in production. Done, because it's all my stuff, right? Whether it's a cloud, whether it's local, I don't care where, but I can put it there and boom, I'm done. Well, App Store, Play Store, right? So that's different. You actually have to submit it up there, and then they have to look at it and they have to decide whether or not they like it. That is if you're putting it up for public consumption in that manner. The other way is, maybe you just do it. Either your customers, you just send it out, they send it out, or just your internal folks, right? You're just building an app for internal that's really not up on the App Store or Play Store. So you have different ways of deploying it out, but you've got to deploy it somehow onto here, right? So is it a push notification, pull notification? How do I get the updates or app onto here? So that's different, and that's a challenge. So that's kind of where we go from there. So the big thing is just to kind of wrap it up. Like I said, those of you who came in a little bit after, I was telling these folks, I start on time. I end on time, if not early, so I think we're going to actually get out of here a little early for you folks. But from here, so the important thing is if you're doing this mobile stuff, right, if you're doing anything with iOS, you got to have a Mac somewhere. And I find this kind of interesting. There are still companies out there that don't allow Macs on their premises. So I mean, how are you going to do that kind of stuff if you don't have a Mac on your site? I don't get it. But anyway, there's some people that still do that. But you got to have that if you're going to do anything with iOS. Not so much mobile web. I mean, as far as building and deploying. My mobile web is different. But if you're doing a native or hybrid, you've got to have a Mac. And then real devices. Obviously, we talked about you've got to have that. And if you're going to do real devices, the only way to really do that is with the cloud. All right, so those really have to go hand in hand. And again, there are different choices for clouds. Pick and choose, whatever fits your particular environment. And then obviously the big thing. So this onus is on the QA folks, right? They've got to come up with all the tests that need to be run. God bless you, and good luck with that. But again, but that's critical. If you don't have that, then it doesn't matter how well you get the source code, how well you build it, how well you get it onto a device. If you can't run through the test and verify everything, then again, what's the point of anything? And then obviously we're at DevOps, Jenkins world. You got to have Jenkins, right? So this is the one that really controls all this stuff. For your action, allows you to control, build your app, allows you to deploy it up to the cloud, allows you to get it onto a device, kick off the tests, manage all the results. And like I said, with all the, we can get into all the other different types of tests that you want to do along with this, right? So we're just talking about the mobile stuff, but still all the API testing, all the performance testing, all that sort of stuff. You still probably want to fire off out of Jenkins on how it does all of those different tests, because the thing that's different about mobile, right? So think about this. If you're back in just the web-only days, right? And I'm a company, I don't want to get information to you, my consumer, and all we had was web. I could send you an email or something like that, right? But it was kind of like I had to throw it out there. I had to wait for you to go and go to like the Starbucks PC cafe or internet cafe, right, and log on, all that sort of stuff. But with mobile, I've got really, I can touch you. Anybody here got the DevOps app from here? Man, they've been hitting me up like all the time, right? I mean, I get a message from them like every 2 minutes. It's driving me nuts. But the point is, I've got this phone with me all the time, and I'm getting a message from them all the time. So mobile is a way to really reach your customers. But on the flip side, if your app doesn't work right? If it performs sluggishly, it doesn't work right, consumers have some power in here when they go up and they rate your app, right? If I'm on the Play Store, I'm looking for an app. If it's got 3 stars or below, I don't even look at it, all right? So this is where consumers really have power now in their pocket, is kind of return the favor. When it was a web world, the only way I could complain, right, is maybe go on a forum or something like that and say, hey, I don't like this, I don't like that. But with mobile, it's a lot more proactive, and then all with the social. Well, we don't have to go into that part. But anyway, so mobile allows you got to have an app that works right, because the last thing you want is bad ratings on the App Store and Play Store. So that's those are the 3 main components. And then this is about us. We're mobile labs. We do a device cloud. That's what we do. I'd be happy to give you more information if you care about that. All I care about, me personally, is from a mobile side, and it's just kind of interesting to me that when I look at all the sessions here at Jenkins World, as much as people are using mobile to do stuff, if you go look at who's doing Google searches, right, where does it come from? It doesn't come from a desktop, doesn't come from a laptop, it comes from this, right? Everybody's using this to do everything. It just seems like there might be, I don't know, a few more sessions on how to do mobile and whatnot, but I go to trade shows, and there's still people actually that tell me they're looking to get into mobile. I'm like, well, it's 2019. I mean, what? I mean, but anyway, so we're all about mobile application testing because again, you got to get it out into people's hands, and it's got to be verified that it tests correctly. So, other than that, are there any questions that you might have? Yes. Okay, so the question is there any best practices on how to run the test parallel in the cloud? So that's going to depend on your test framework. So let's pick an Appium, for example. All right, because that's similar to Selenium. So what you could do there is you can actually thread out multiple instances of that. I'll bring it back to more like our side. So you can actually query the device cloud, get a list of all the devices that are available. I can get a list of that, and then I can, like from a test-ng perspective, right? I can thread those out within test-ng so they all run parallel, right? And you can do it that way. So it's pretty easy within Appium to do that. Some of the other commercial products are not so flexible. Like a UFT, for example, it only runs one instance per box, right? So if I wanted to run like 48 instances of that, I'd have to have 48 instances of UFT. So that's what I was talking about. It really relies on the test framework that you're using. But something like an Appium, it's very easy to thread that out and do that. And you can just do it right from your one box, right? So some of the others, the commercial products are going to probably require you to have multiple instances of an end user box to run those tests.
Yeah, we are actually using the Python UWSGS server, relying on putting the parallelism across the test.
Okay.
The only problem with that is like how to collect the reports for different parallel tests and aggregate it and put it in your workspace.
Okay, yeah, so the problem with trying to do it within parallel tests within device cloud is your device cloud has to be able to support the parallel execution. So depending on how they have it set up, I mean that's for us, it's always on. You just every driver creation statement we get, we spin up an Appium session. So it's very easy for us to do that. All right. Any other questions? All right, perfect. Well, hey, thanks for your time. Thanks for being here. Have a great rest of your day. Appreciate it.